never thought I'd see a man's soul leave his body while he was still breathing. But that's exactly what happened on that scorching summer day at the Sapphire Shores Resort. The sun beat down mercilessly as I arranged my fruit stand, the same way I had for the past 3 years. My arthritis flared up, a constant reminder of my 68 years on this earth. But I kept at it. A man's got to eat, after all. Fresh pineapples. Sweet mangoes. I called out, my voice carrying across the pristine beach. That's when I saw him. Ethan Harper. The man whose name graced magazine covers and whose fortune could buy small countries. He strode across the sand like he owned it, which, for all I knew, he probably did. Our eyes met for a brief moment. His were cold, calculating. I nodded politely, but he looked right through me. "Sir, would you like some fresh fruit?" I asked, holding up a ripe mango. What happened next still haunts my dreams. Harper's face contorted into a mask of disgust. "Get that filth away from me," he snarled. Before I could react, he swatted the mango from my hand. It hit the sand with a dull thud. "Who let this beggar onto the property?" Harper bellowed, his voice carrying across the beach. "This is a 5-star resort, not a charity case." The other guests froze, their faces a mix of shock and embarrassment. But no one moved to help. "I'm sorry, sir," I stammered, trying to salvage what dignity I had left. "I didn't mean to offend. Harper laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "Your very existence offends me, old man." With a swift motion, he upended my entire cart. Fruits rolled across the sand, some splashing into the surf. Years of hard work, scattered in seconds. "Please," I whispered, my voice breaking. "This is all I have." For a moment, something flickered in Harper's eyes. Regret? Compassion? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Security," he shouted. "Remove this trash from the premises. And make sure he never comes back." As rough hands grabbed my arms, I caught sight of a young woman at the reception desk. Maria, I think her name was. She looked at me with pity, then quickly averted her gaze. They dragged me off the beach, my protests falling on deaf ears. As I reached the parking lot, I heard Harper's voice one last time. "Let this be a lesson," he announced to the stunned onlookers. "This is a place for winners, not losers." I slumped against my old pickup truck, the weight of humiliation crushing my chest. In that moment, I felt every one of my 68 years. But as I sat there, something strange happened. I thought about Harper's eyes when he looked at me. Behind the contempt, I saw something else. Something broken. That's when I realized I hadn't just witnessed a rich man bullying a poor one. I'd seen a man's soul leave his body. Ethan Harper was alive, but something essential inside him had died long ago. As I drove home, my truck rattling with every pothole, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of my story with Ethan Harper. It was just the beginning. Little did I know how right I was. Folks, I've been wondering, if you were in my shoes that day on the beach, would you have stood up to Ethan or kept quiet like the others? It ain't always easy to do the right thing when you're faced with power and money. What would you have done? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm mighty curious to hear what you think. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. 3 days after my humiliation at Sapphire Shores, I found myself face to face with Ethan Harper again. But this time, the tables had turned. I was closing up my fruit stand in town when I spotted him. Gone was the arrogant stride and designer suit. Instead, he stumbled down the street, his clothes wrinkled and his eyes wild with desperation. "You," he croaked, pointing a shaky finger at me. "I know you." I tensed, ready for another onslaught. But what came next shocked me to my core. "Please," Harper whispered, his voice cracking. "I need help." For a moment, I was tempted to turn away, to give him a taste of his own medicine. But something in his eyes stopped me. The same brokenness I'd glimpsed before had now consumed him entirely. "What happened to you, Mr. Harper?" I asked, unable to hide my curiosity. He laughed bitterly. What didn't happen? My assets are frozen. My cards are canceled. I'm nobody now. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd called me a beggar now stood before me, practically begging himself. Come on, I said, surprising myself. Let's get you something to eat. As we walked to my small apartment, Harper's story tumbled out. A federal investigation, a disastrous investment, a betrayal by his assistant. In the span of 72 hours, he'd lost everything. Why are you helping me? He asked as we entered my modest home. After what I did to you. I busied myself in the kitchen, pondering his question. Because, I finally said, 30 years ago, someone helped me when I was at my lowest. I'm just paying it forward. Harper collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. I don't deserve kindness. Maybe not, I agreed, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. But you need it. And sometimes, that's enough. As he wolfed down the food, I studied him. The sharp edges of his arrogance had been worn away, revealing something almost human underneath. What am I going to do? He muttered between bites. First, you're going to finish those eggs, I said firmly. Then, we'll figure it out. One step at a time. Harper looked up at me, his eyes brimming with tears he was too proud to shed. Why do you care what happens to me? I sighed, memories of my own past flooding back. Because I've been where you are, Mr. Harper. Rock bottom. And I know the climb back up is a lot easier when someone offers you a hand. Ethan, he said quietly. Please, call me Ethan. As the night wore on, we talked. Really talked. About life, loss, and the price of ambition. With each passing hour, I saw more of the man behind the monster who'd humiliated me on the beach. By the time dawn broke, a decision had been made. The look of shock on his face was priceless. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something else. A spark of hope, flickering to life in eyes that had been dead just hours before. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just set something monumental in motion. For better or worse, Ethan Harper had entered my life. And nothing would ever be the same again. The alarm blared at 4:30 a.m., same as it had for years. But this morning was different. I had a guest, a fallen titan learning the ropes of a simpler life. Rise and shine, Ethan. I called out, rapping on his door. Fruit waits for no man. A groan answered me, followed by a thud and a muffled curse. I chuckled, remembering my own first days of early mornings. We hit the road by 4:45, my old pickup truck groaning under the weight of fresh fruit. Ethan sat beside me, looking like death warmed over. How do you do this every day? He mumbled, clutching a thermos of coffee like a lifeline. Same way you used to make millions, I replied. One day at a time. The farmer's market was already buzzing when we arrived. I introduced Ethan as my nephew, here to help out. No one questioned it in our little community, helping family was as natural as breathing. All right, Ethan, I said, handing him an apron. Let's see those Harvard-educated hands sort some mangoes. He fumbled at first, nearly dropping a crate of papayas. But as the morning wore on, I saw a change come over him. The furrowed brow of concentration slowly gave way to something else. Interest. Maybe even enjoyment. Fresh pineapples. Ethan called out, his voice gaining confidence with each sale. Sweetest mangoes in town. By noon, we'd sold most of our stock. Ethan's shirt was soaked with sweat, his hands dirty, but his eyes were alive. Not bad for your first day, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. He grinned, a genuine smile that took years off his face. You know, Frank, I think I sold more fruit today than I did stocks in my last month on Wall Street. As we packed up, a commotion caught our attention. A young woman was arguing with the owner of the fish stall next to us. Please, Mr. Guzman, she pleaded. Just one more week. The restaurant will pay, I promise. Sorry, Maria, Guzman replied, his face stern but eyes sad. I can't keep extending credit. Times are tough for everyone. I recognized her then, the receptionist from Sapphire Shores who had witnessed Ethan's outburst. Ethan tensed beside me, recognition and shame flashing across his face. But then, something remarkable happened. He stepped forward. Excuse me, he said, his voice steady. I couldn't help overhearing. Perhaps I can help? Maria's eyes widened in shock, darting between Ethan and me. But how? It's a long story, Ethan said softly. But right now, let's focus on your problem. Mr. Guzman, how much does the lady owe? After a brief negotiation, Ethan handed over the cash, most of what he'd earned that day. Maria's gratitude was palpable, her eyes brimming with tears. Thank you, she whispered. Both of you. I won't forget this. As she hurried off, Ethan turned to me, a mix of emotions playing across his face. That felt good? I offered. He nodded, looking almost surprised. Yeah. Really good. On the drive home, Ethan was quiet, lost in thought. Finally, he spoke up. Frank, I've been thinking. That woman, Maria of her restaurant, must be struggling. Maybe I could help. I know numbers, strategy. Perhaps I could offer some advice? I glanced at him, seeing not the arrogant tycoon from the beach, but a man rediscovering his purpose. That's not a bad idea, Ethan, I said carefully. But remember, you're not the big shot anymore. You'll need to earn their trust. He nodded solemnly. I know. And I will. One day at a time, right? As we pulled up to my small house, I felt a surge of pride. The man sitting next to me wasn't the same one I'd brought home days ago. This Ethan was softer around the edges, his eyes holding a newfound humility. You did good today, kid, I said, surprising myself with the affection in my voice. Ethan smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. Thanks, Frank. For everything. As we walked inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Ethan Harper was awakening to a new reality, and I had a front row seat to the transformation. Little did I know, the real challenges were yet to come. They say calm comes before a storm. In our case, the calm lasted exactly 2 weeks before all hell broke loose. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Ethan and I were closing up shop at the market when a sleek black car pulled up. The window rolled down, revealing a face that sent chills down my spine. Well, a voice drawled. The mighty Ethan Harper, reduced to peddling fruit. Ethan froze, his face draining of color. Victor, he whispered. The man stepped out, his expensive suit a stark contrast to our humble surroundings. Surprised to see me, old friend? I stepped forward, protective instincts kicking in. Can we help you with something? Victor's eyes flickered to me, dismissive. Stay out of this, old man. This is between me and Harper. Ethan's hand on my shoulder stopped me. It's okay, Frank, he said, his voice steady. What do you want, Victor? A predatory smile spread across Victor's face. Oh, just checking in on an old colleague. Imagine my surprise when I tracked you down to this quaint little town. The tension was palpable. I could see Ethan struggling to maintain his composure. If you're here to gloat, you've had your fun, Ethan said. Now leave. Victor chuckled, the sound devoid of any warmth. Gloat? No, Ethan. I'm here to offer you a lifeline. He pulled out an envelope, waving it tantalizingly. All the evidence the feds have on you. It could all disappear. You could have your old life back. I watched Ethan closely, saw the flicker of longing in his eyes. For a moment, I feared he'd cave. But then he straightened, meeting Victor's gaze. At what cost? Victor's smile widened. Smart man. Always was. It's simple. I need access to your offshore accounts. The ones even the feds don't know about. Ethan's laugh was bitter. So that's it. You want me to take the fall for your dirty money. Think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement, Victor purred. You get your life back, I get a clean slate. Everyone wins. The silence that followed was deafening. I held my breath, realizing this was the moment of truth for Ethan. Finally, he spoke. No. Victor's facade cracked. No? Do you realize what you're turning down? Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but firm. I know exactly what I'm turning down. A chance to go back to being the man I was. The man who'd throw an old vendor off a beach for daring to exist in my space. He glanced at me, a small smile playing on his lips. I like who I'm becoming, Victor. I won't let you or anyone else drag me back. For a moment, Victor looked genuinely shocked. Then his face hardened. You'll regret this, Harper. When you're rotting in a cell, remember I offered you a way out. As Victor's car peeled away, Ethan slumped against our stand, the adrenaline leaving him in a rush. You okay, kid? I asked, concern coloring my voice. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, I can't believe I almost considered it. I squeezed his shoulder. But you didn't. That's what matters. As we packed up in silence, I could see the wheels turning in Ethan's head. Finally, he spoke. Frank, there's something I need to tell you. About my past, about who I really was. I held up a hand, stopping him. Not here. Let's get home first. The drive back was tense, the air heavy with unspoken words. As we settled in my small living room, Ethan took a deep breath. I've done things, Frank. Things I'm not proud of. The man you met on that beach? He was just the tip of the iceberg. For the next hour, Ethan laid bare his past. The shady deals, the lives ruined in pursuit of profit, the moral compromises that had eaten away at his soul. When he finished, silence fell. I could see him bracing for judgment, for rejection. Instead, I asked one simple question. And now? Confusion flickered across his face. What do you mean? I mean, who are you now, Ethan? Who do you want to be? He pondered this, his brow furrowed in concentration. I want to be better. To make amends, somehow. I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. Then that's what we'll do. But Ethan, you need to understand that the road ahead won't be easy. Victor won't be the last ghost from your past to come knocking. Ethan's jaw set, determination replacing the fear in his eyes. I know. But I'm ready to face them. All of them. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the room, I realized we were at a crossroads. The real test was just beginning, and I prayed we were ready for what lay ahead. Little did I know, the storm that had been brewing was about to break, and it would test us in ways we never imagined. The day the FBI came for Ethan, the sky wept. Rain pounded my tin roof like 1,000 angry fists as two agents in dark suits stepped out of their government-issue sedan. I saw them coming from the kitchen window. Ethan was at the table, poring over Maria's restaurant books, oblivious to the approaching storm. Ethan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They're here. He looked up, confusion giving way to understanding as he followed my gaze. For a moment, fear flashed in his eyes. Then, something else took over. Resolve. It's okay, Frank, he said, standing up. I knew this day would come. The knock on the door was sharp, authoritative. I opened it, rain splattering the worn welcome mat. Frank Delacroix, the taller agent asked, flashing his badge. We're looking for Ethan Harper. Before I could respond, Ethan appeared behind me. I'm Ethan Harper, he said, his voice steady. I've been expecting you. The agents exchanged glances. This clearly wasn't the reaction they'd anticipated. Mr. Harper, we have a warrant for your arrest, the second agent said, producing a document. You have the right to remain silent. As they rid him his rights, I watched Ethan. Gone was the arrogant tycoon I'd met on that beach. In his place stood a man ready to face the consequences of his actions. Can I have a moment? Ethan asked, gesturing towards me. The agents nodded, stepping back. Ethan turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and regret. Frank, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. I gripped his shoulder, words failing me for a moment. You're not alone in this, kid. Remember that. He nodded, blinking back tears. There's a letter in my room, under the mattress. It explains everything. Make sure Maria gets it, okay? Before I could ask what he meant, the agents were leading him away. The last I saw of Ethan was his silhouette in the back of their car, head held high as they drove off into the rain. The house felt emptier than it had in years. I slumped into a chair, the weight of what had just happened settling over me like a heavy blanket. Then I remembered the letter. I found it exactly where Ethan said it would be. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure of what secrets it might contain. Dear Frank, it began. If you're reading this, it means I've been arrested. I want you to know that I'm okay with that. It's time I face the music for my past actions. The letter went on to detail everything: the offshore accounts, the shady deals, the names of those involved. But it was the last part that hit me like a punch to the gut. I've transferred everything I have left to an account in your name. Use it to help Maria save her restaurant. Use it to help others who need a second chance, like you gave me. And Frank, thank you for showing me what real wealth looks like. I sat there, letter in hand, as the rain continued its relentless assault outside. My mind raced with the implications of what Ethan had done. A knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Maria, soaked to the bone, her eyes wide with worry. Frank, she gasped. I just saw Ethan being taken away. What happened? I ushered her in, handing her a towel. It's a long story, Maria. But first, there's something you need to see. As I showed her the letter, explaining Ethan's plan, I saw a range of emotions played across her face: shock, disbelief, and finally, a glimmer of hope. He did this, for me, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I nodded, feeling a swell of pride for the man Ethan had become. For you, for this community. He wanted to make things right. Maria looked up at me, determination replacing the shock in her eyes. Then we can't let his sacrifice be in vain. We have work to do, Frank. As we sat at my kitchen table, planning our next moves, I couldn't help but marvel at the twists and turns life had taken. A disgraced tycoon had found redemption in our little town, and in doing so, had set in motion a chain of events that would change all of our lives forever. The storm outside began to subside, but I knew the real tempest was just beginning. Ethan's battle was far from over, and neither was ours. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of real hope. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. As a community. As a family. The day of Ethan's trial dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm raging in my gut. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their cameras flashing like lightning as Maria and I pushed our way through. Mr. Delacroix, one of them shouted. What's your relationship with Ethan Harper? I ignored them, focusing on the imposing building ahead. Inside, Ethan's fate would be decided. The courtroom was a sea of suits and stern faces. I spotted Ethan at the defendant's table, his shoulders squared despite the weight pressing down on him. When he saw us, a small smile flickered across his face. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, I found myself holding my breath. The prosecution painted Ethan as a ruthless tycoon, detailing his crimes with cold precision. But when it was the defense's turn, something unexpected happened. Ethan's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court. A murmur rippled through the room as Ethan took the stand. He looked different, humbler, yet somehow stronger. I won't waste this court's time denying my crimes, he began, his voice steady. I did everything I'm accused of, and more. I was driven by greed, by a thirst for power that I thought would fill the emptiness inside me. He paused, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. But then I lost everything. And in losing it all, I found something far more valuable. I found humanity in a small town, in a community that showed me kindness I didn't deserve, and a man who saw worth in me when I couldn't see it myself. Ethan went on to detail how he'd used his remaining resources to help our town, to make amends. As he spoke, I saw the judge's expression soften almost imperceptibly. I'm ready to face the consequences of my actions, Ethan concluded. But I asked the court to consider not just who I was, but who I'm striving to become. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the reporters seemed too stunned to scribble notes. After what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. Mr. Harper, your crimes are serious. But your actions since then show a genuine attempt at redemption. I sentence you to 5 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 3, contingent on your continued efforts to make amends. The gavel fell with a resounding crack. It wasn't a full acquittal, but it was far less than the decades Ethan had been facing. As they led Ethan away, our eyes met one last time. No words were needed, the look we shared said it all. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. Outside, the media frenzy had reached fever pitch. Microphones were thrust in our faces, questions flying like bullets. How do you feel about the verdict? What's next for the community? Is this really justice? I raised my hands, silencing the crowd. Ethan Harper made mistakes. Big ones. But he's also shown us the power of second chances. Our town isn't just going to sit back and wait for him to return. We're going to build on what he started. Maria stepped forward, her voice strong despite her nervousness. Thanks to Mr. Harper's contributions, we're launching a program to help small businesses in our community thrive. We're calling it the Second Chance Initiative. The reporters went wild, but we pushed past them, heading for my old pickup truck. As we drove home, Maria turned to me. Do you think we can really do this, Frank? Change things? I thought about Ethan, about the transformation I'd witnessed. I think, I said slowly, that one person can start a ripple that becomes a wave. Ethan was that ripple. Now it's up to us to keep it going. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I reflected on the strange turns life can take. A chance encounter on a beach had set in motion events that were reshaping our entire community. I picked up my phone, dialing a number I'd memorized weeks ago. Hello, this is Frank Delacroix. I'd like to schedule a visit with Ethan Harper. As I hung up, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Ethan's journey wasn't over, and neither was ours. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long while, I was excited to see where it would lead. The stars were coming out now, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. And in their quiet glow, I made a silent promise. To Ethan, to our town, to myself. We would make this second chance count. For all of us. 3 years can change a man. I realized this as I stood outside the prison gates, waiting for Ethan. The sun beat down mercilessly, but I barely noticed, my eyes fixed on the metal doors. They opened with a clang, and there he was. Ethan Harper, once the titan of Wall Street, now just a man in a plain shirt and jeans, carrying a small duffel bag. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, breaking into a grin, Ethan strode towards me. Frank, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You came. I pulled him into a hug, surprising us both. Of course I came, kid. Welcome back to the land of the free. As we drove back to town, Ethan peppered me with questions. How was the Second Chance Initiative going? Was Maria's restaurant thriving? Had the community changed? I filled him in, watching his face light up with each piece of good news. The initiative had helped dozens of small businesses. Maria's place was now the go-to spot in town. And our little community? It was transforming, one day at a time. You did good, Ethan, I said as we approached the town limits. Real good. He shook his head, humility replacing his old arrogance. I just provided the means, Frank. You, Maria, the town, you did the real work. As we entered Main Street, Ethan fell silent. The changes were immediately apparent. Fresh paint on storefronts, new businesses, a palpable energy in the air. We pulled up to Maria's restaurant, now expanded and bustling with customers. A banner hung over the entrance, "Welcome home, Ethan." Ethan's eyes widened. Frank, what is this? Before I could answer, the door burst open. Maria rushed out, followed by a crowd of familiar faces, people whose lives had been touched by the Second Chance initiative. Surprise, they shouted in unison. Ethan stood frozen, overwhelmed. Maria approached, tears in her eyes. Welcome home, she said softly, pulling him into a hug. One by one, people came up to shake Ethan's hand, sharing stories of how the initiative had changed their lives. The local baker who'd expanded his shop. The young tech entrepreneur who'd started a coding school. The single mom who'd opened a daycare center. As the impromptu celebration continued, I noticed Ethan slip away. I found him in the back alley, leaning against the wall, his eyes closed. You okay, kid? I asked. He turned to me, his face a mix of joy and disbelief. I never imagined. Frank, how is this possible? I leaned against the wall beside him. You gave people hope, Ethan. And hope is a powerful thing. It can change everything. He nodded, processing. What now? He asked quietly. Now? I chuckled. Now you roll up your sleeves and get to work. There's still a lot to be done. A determined look crossed Ethan's face, reminiscent of the businessman I'd first met, but tempered with something new. Compassion. I'm ready, he said. As we rejoined the party, I couldn't help but marvel at the journey we'd been on. From that fateful day on the beach to this moment of triumph, it had been a roller coaster of emotions and challenges. Later that night, as the celebration wound down, Ethan and I sat on my porch, looking out at the stars. You know, Frank, Ethan said, breaking the comfortable silence. When I was in prison, I had a lot of time to think. About who I was, who I wanted to be. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. I realized something. True wealth isn't about money or power. It's about the lives you touch, the difference you make. I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. Sounds like prison taught you well. Ethan laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. No, Frank. You taught me. You and this town. As the night deepened, we sat in companionable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt. But looking at Ethan, seeing the man he'd become, I knew we were ready to face whatever came our way. In the distance, the town lights twinkled, a beacon of hope in the darkness. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes, the greatest adventures begin with a single act of kindness. Our story was far from over. In fact, it felt like we were just getting started. Now, I've shared my tale, but I can't help but wonder, have you ever experienced a moment that changed the course of your life, like my encounter with Ethan did for me? A moment where kindness or a second chance made all the difference. Share your stories in the comments, won't you? I'd love to read them. And while you're at it, why not join our little community here? Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. That way, you won't miss out on any of our stories. And if you enjoyed this one, give it a thumbs up. It means the world to this old timer. Remember, folks, life's full of surprises. You never know when the next chapter of your story might begin.